So this might be a little bit more on the niche side, but stick around because I think this is one definitely worth checking out. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be taking a deep look at The Magic of Recluce by L.E. Modesitt Jr., which is the first book in the Recluce saga, which is a non-linear, kind of like generally connected within the world collection of books and stories in this series. Of course, we have to take a look at the cover here because I am a sucker for Daryl K. Sweet covers. Probably not much of a surprise. But yeah, I really wanted to talk about this one, and I've mentioned it a bit in the weekly updates that I did as I was going. But this is such an interesting book, and it's one that I really enjoyed, although I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it at first, because this is pretty unique. So, talking about this, The Magic of Recluce, and the reason it's called The Magic of Recluce, because this really is starting this world and this story. And we do follow, we have a good character journey with our main character, Laris, who I'll definitely talk about as well. But I think something that stood out to me here is, like I said, there are like 20-some books in Recluce, and they take place at different time periods, have different characters. There are some that are like, direct follow-ups to others. But like, as I mentioned, you don't get a direct follow-up with this character until like the 5th book in the series, but it's something you're supposed to just read in publication order, and then you find out more about the world. But specifically, I saw something where the author started writing this because they had issues with how world building was being done in the 80s, and they really wanted to write something that was very world building focused and just building out a world. And if you've heard me talk about books, world building is a big thing for me. It's something I'm really focused on, and it's one of my favorite things about fantasy. I really, really love getting a completely different fantasy world, and I love exploring it, finding out about how it works, how the magic works, how, what the history is, what kind of landscape, all kinds of stuff. Those are things that I really enjoy. So seeing a book that ends up being more about that is already something I was pretty interested in. But the thing is, this starts off also with some bold, but I think really smart choices that work, but make it so you might have to be a little bit patient with this one, which I know not everybody likes the kind of book you have to be a little bit patient with, but I commented when I was talking about this before that the beginning is a little bit boring, but it's boring on purpose because our character here, Laris, our main character, is fairly young, and he lives in Recluce. And in Recluce, if you basically don't exactly fit the mold of what you want to be, where order is the most important thing, if you can't focus, or you just for whatever reason aren't like exactly what they want, you get two choices. You either are exiled forever, or you have to go on a danger guild, which is some sort of quest where you're supposed to like find yourself and provide a service or something before you can come back. And so he's young, and he's just, his thing is he finds everything boring. He finds the idea of everything being so perfect and ordered just boring, and he doesn't understand why it has to be that way, and he has all of these questions, but nobody wants to really give him any answers. And so that's kind of how we start. So we're following a younger character who's very, very bored, feels like nobody's giving him answers. And if you think about the fact that, fantasy, especially back, in the day, had the kind of the idea that it was marketed more to, boys and young men, and obviously that's not the case, and there's been tons of fantasy that appeals to everyone, and we see that more, but just thinking about the younger audience in general, which this isn't by any means, but fantasy is popular with younger people a lot, and so kind of having that feel where I feel like you definitely can identify with, like if I would have read this when I was younger, I feel like I probably would have, especially with just, being bored with your life and, wanting other stuff to happen and wanting answers that you just aren't as easy to get. And so I feel like the way that it's written like that, feels very intentional to resonate with that kind of audience. And so it's what I'm really curious on how I would have felt if I read when I was younger. But reading it as an adult, at first I was just like, this is like, okay, this is kind of boring. But the more I got in a little bit, I'm just like, yeah, that really, really is the point, though, because it's showing, I mean, that's how the character feels, and this is a first-person narrative, so that's how they're communicating it to you. And the further you get, the more you kind of realize more things are that are going on. And that's the thing too. The narrative is it's written in a way that is very obtuse at points, also on purpose. And that is something that's really hard to do well. Robin Hobb would be an example, I would say, of an author who does this in the Fitz books, especially in Farseer, but in all of them really, where it's first-person narrative, and so if the person doesn't notice something or they don't fully realize what's going on, they're obviously not going to tell you about it, and they're not going to describe it, and, you know, there's things where you have to kind of read between the lines, and you get a lot of that here, and I think it's handled in a way where you start to really slowly see what's going on, much before the character really is seeing what's going on with certain things, and before they're putting pieces together as well. And so it's done in a way I think that works really well, and just makes it even all the more interesting because you start to put things together, and then you're learning more about the world, and you're seeing like, oh no, when's the character? They probably don't even realize this kind of thing. And so I think it works really well, although it's one of those styles, once again, that can be, I know, not for everybody with writing like that, because some people just want it to be a little bit more upfront with everything. This being, like I said, first person, doing it with this style and doing it where we're finding out about the world, but we're also following a character that doesn't really know a whole lot about the world at all, and that's kind of their journey as they learn more about the world and they start to find things out for themselves. Following it like that, I think, is a great way also just for the idea that this is ultimately introducing us to the world, and we just happen to be doing it through this character of Laris. And to talk a little bit more about the character Laris as well, it's like I mentioned, he's younger, and he's being sent to either be exiled or go on this danger guild with people who are mostly older, because we're also, even though that fits kind of the stereotypical fantasy protagonist, the younger man going, it's actually normally people don't do this until they're much older, but he's going now just because he had apprenticed to his uncle, who's a woodworker, and he was getting pretty good at it, but just once again found it boring, and so he already wasn't working out with his parents and his uncle, and so they decide that this is what's going to be happening. And we have this focus, and we find out about this world on Recluce, which is an island where it's just everything is absolutely order, and we start finding out about this world where we're told that order is basically absolute good, chaos is absolute evil. And we literally, because, of course, fantasy, although it's switched here, we're looking at it in a very black and white way. Those in order, like the order masters, the people in Recluce, they wear all black because that's seen as like the order character, because it's the absence of color, and it's flat, it's there, it's ordered. And white is the color of chaos, all of the colors combined. So it's like, I feel like it's one of the first times that the white and black symbolism actually makes so much sense, because normally it's just white is good, black is bad, but the way it's done here, it makes so much sense, and that's a side note, but it's something that I love, the way that it's actually literally described that way, and it makes so much sense. I'm like, yes, thank you for finally acknowledging that the color scheme doesn't always work. But so that's why we're seeing its world, and it's presented as very, very black and white, and that's also part of, what he finds just the complete order and the constant perfection that's expected on Recluce, just boring, simply put. And so we're shown this world, and we're told that everything is black and white, where in reality it is anything but. And that's kind of what the character is discovering as they go on and they find out about the world, and they start to learn things. And it's also the idea that they're constantly, Laris is asking questions, and he just wants to be told things, and he's not given any of these answers. And he has to slowly find out that some things you do have to find out for yourself. And it's done in a way, too, where it's easy to see the frustration, and I'm sure we've all felt that way sometimes, whether younger or older in general, where sometimes you do just want to be told something, and you get that. And it's a trope that I think can be used, once again, it's one that can be used to be the wrong, if you have something where it's just all the questions are like, no, you need to find out yourself, I'm not going to tell you. But in this exact instant, it's actually explained through the narrative and through the way the world and the magic works, why there's been such a lack of answers. But even when Laris gets answers, if it's not really what he wants, he just doesn't really see the value in them either. So his journey is one I think that's really great, and although we're not we're not, for the most part, moving super quickly or doing anything huge and massive. We get some pretty big moments, and Lyris goes on a really great character journey as well. And so it's really satisfying in that regard. But honestly, it's the big thing is just I enjoyed just being in this world and just seeing what's happening. So this is one of those things where there's not constant action by any means. There's a lot of woodworking and things like that. Things like that are really, really important in what's happening. There's a lot of just talk on order and chaos and how the world works, and there's the traveling and this kind of thing, and all of these moments where we're not really doing a ton. It's almost kind of slice of life as we're still learning about the world, but it's something that worked really, really well for me. I think, especially for readers who like kind of the modern, cozy slice of life, this doesn't quite fit in either of those by any means, but it has that feel where you're just kind of in this fantasy world and you're just sitting back and enjoying finding out what's going to be happening next. And it's one, like I said, especially because of the fact that world building is something I'm such a huge fan of. I'm so curious to find out what more is going to happen. And like, I'm curious with what's going to happen to this character, but I'm more curious to just find out more about this world, because there's a lot that's set up here, and I feel like we barely scratched the surface of how the magic and the world works. We've gotten some answers, but once again, we've gotten some answers through the character finding some things out. They're not exactly the wisest person ever, so there's so much more to go. I'm really, really curious just to continue to explore this world, find out more about what's going to be happening, and I think this is a really, in so many ways, the way that this book is composed and written, I think is genius. This isn't something that I'm like, I absolutely am in love with, and I don't think that this is likely to ever be like my new favorite series or anything to that regard. But at the same time, I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I feel like this is going to be a series that I'm going to enjoy coming back to and just learning more about this world and digging into, and it serves a really great purpose for me. And this was a solid 4-star for me. I feel like for whatever reason, it's just like, although I thoroughly enjoyed, I never got it never got to the point where I was absolutely in love with it. But at the same time, I'm just it was something that it was so pleasant, and so maybe that's just because of the fact that it kind of had that feeling of just sitting back in the world, something I really liked, but didn't have whatever that extra thing is for me. But at the same time, like I said, I'm thoroughly interested in this world, and I'm very, very curious to see what more is going to happen and just continue to learn more about it. And so that's why I've said all of these positive things, despite the fact that I think I rated this 4 stars. But there's a lot to enjoy here as well. It's really one of those things that is just the style of it, the way that it's written. It's pretty different from a lot of what you're getting now, and it feels very different from the modern fantasy. And I tend to be a fan of the bit older. This still falls into the 90s. Oh, I think the first book was 91 for this first book. So, which I don't want to think about how long ago that actually was, though. But so this is an area where it tends to be kind of my niche and stuff that I've enjoyed here. And this is one, though, like I said, that I've not heard a lot of people talk about this. This is one that I think is definitely worth checking out. And I was really happy to have some people. So if you're watching, I didn't forget about you. Some people who have read this and, for the most part, enjoyed it and recommended definitely continuing reading publication order. So I'm glad that there's some, but this is one that there's so many books out in this series and by this author, and it's an author that I have not read anything by prior to this, so I was really excited to do so. I'll note, too, one of the weird things in here, which I don't know fully how I feel about, but there's a lot of onomatopoeia in here. And I mentioned this in one of the wrap-ups, I think, too. But there's a lot of onomatopoeia. And so if you're doing the audio, which I did do audio for this, you get that with the narrator, which I should probably talk a little bit about the audio, because it looks like, if not the whole thing, most of this series is included on Audible Plus. And so that's what I ended up listening, because I have several of the mass market paperbacks. I hate mass market paperbacks. I don't like reading them a whole lot, so this is probably going to be one I do largely on audio. But it's narrated by Kirby Hayborn, who also fits really, really well, because he gets the boring parts down where he's just kind of reading them in a disinterested way. He feels like his basic voice for the character seems to fit really, really well. And then when you have other characters, the voices are so different and so much stronger, and uh, the different voices, the sound effects, he does a really, really fantastic job. So this is only the second thing I've listened to from him as a narrator, and wonderful job that he does as well, and I think fits. I'll be curious though, because he's one of those narrators that feels so perfect for this particular character and this particular story. So I'll be curious what the other ones are like, to be honest, because that could be interesting. But it'll be something interesting to see. But yeah, it's just there's so much that I enjoyed here, and I know that, like I said, a lot of the things that I said that I think worked really, really well and were positives are going to be things that make this not necessarily the best fit for some people. If you like a book that's going to pull you in right away, I don't know that this will necessarily do this. I do feel like this is one you probably need to be a little bit patient with as you get going, which is why, although I've kept this completely spoiler-free, and there is actually still even more I could say with spoilers, because of some of the things that are revealed are also play into how genius I think a lot of the things that were done and the way this was formatted are, especially in the beginning, when you find out more details as you go that just give you more background or more details, and they change the way you see things. And like I said, but because the character is a bit obtuse at times, and that's how it's written, you can pick those things up slowly, but the character's not necessarily getting them the way that you are. But so having a bit of a slow start, that can be a little bit boring on purpose, but boring on purpose can still be a little bit boring. A little bit of a slow start, I know not everybody's going to be into that. The kind of obtuse writing with the character, I know some people don't like that either. Because I've heard people who that kind of thing irritated them, and Farseer as well. They're just kind of general, more slower, but also just uneventful parts, because the book flows really well. There's not a lot of this that felt particularly slow, at least to me. Take that with a grain of salt, because I love my slow books. But there's a lot of uneventful parts here, I will say. Like I said, where we're focusing on things like woodworking or how order works or this or that. And even the parts that do have some action, it's the way that the action is perceived as well is very colored through this particular character and the way that they see things. And the way this character sees things, once again, is not necessarily the way things are, or the way that other characters see things as well. So it makes for a really interesting read with the style, and it's another reason why I'm really curious to see what the next book with completely different characters in a completely different time in the world is going to be like, because this was so interesting and uniquely done. But that kind of style, I know, is not necessarily going to be for everyone. In fact, Jake, I imagine you're not watching this, but Jake, the Bookish Drummer, who we have pretty different tastes in books, but he commented saying he hated this book. He didn't like it. He hated the onomatopoeia. He didn't like the character, and so which I can get. It's the kind of character that, once again, I feel like it's a fine line, and it's hard to do some of the things with the way this character is written well. For me, it worked, but I can absolutely see why others won't. And that's why this is one I recommend giving a try. Just to see, because I think there's a lot to enjoy. This does absolutely work as a standalone too. Like I said, there is a follow-up to it eventually, but this absolutely works as a standalone. And like I said, this seems like another one of those series where, granted, you're supposed to read them, I think, in publication order, because things about the world will be revealed more over time as you're going, even though they take place at different times. But it's one that you can kind of just pick up, read a book, and I think they're all going to probably work fairly well as standalones, even though some of them are taking place in the same general timeline. I don't know how many characters or anything that we'll see return, but I'm excited to find out. But anyway, those are my pretty long, hopefully not too rambly thoughts on the Magic of Recluce. Like I said, this is one I really wanted to talk about in a bit more detail, because there's a lot here that I really enjoyed, and I had a really, really good time reading this. This was just really enjoyable for me, and it's one that I'd love to see more people try and check out, because I love when I get to these authors that, like, some people have read for years and years, but other people have never heard of, or just like heard of but never tried. it's an area that I really enjoy, and I'm glad that this one worked out, because this is one of those series that I've been meaning to try for a long time, and I really wasn't sure what I was going to, so I'm glad that I was focusing on the read your shelves, things I physically have, because that got me to give this one a shot, and yeah, I was pretty happy with it. So let me know your thoughts on anything I said, if this sounds like it would or wouldn't be for you based on the description as well, or especially for those of you who have read, if you agree or disagree with any of my thoughts here, or if there was things that you liked or disliked that were very different from me, and that kind of thing as well. But really interested, like I said, obviously I've talked for this long. I had a lot of thoughts on this book, so love to discuss more with you in the comments or over in Discord as well, because you, of course, can always check the description for the Wizard of the Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun. We'd love to have you. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and I already said check the link in the description, so make sure if you enjoy my content to subscribe.